Morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you to today's webinar on comparative world literatures. We are truly honored to have with us our respected Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, West Bengal, Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, and joining us as our distinguished speakers, Professor P. Kannan, sir, and Professor Malashri Lal, ma'am, whose insights into world literatures will surely illuminate today's discussion. Now, I'm especially privileged to introduce Honorable Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, West Bengal, Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, who is a renowned poet, creative writer, and academician. With an illustrious academic background, she previously headed the School of Foreign Languages at IGNOU, New Delhi. A prolific author of 23 books, she is a best-selling author on Amazon. Her academic achievements include double gold medals in both graduation and post-graduation, as well as the prestigious Literary Award Gold Medal from the Vice President of India for her outstanding contributions to English studies. She has recently been honored with the Michael Madhusudan Academy Award and Lifetime Achievement Award in the year 2024. Her latest publication, Medusa, is a testament to her literary prowess. Her research expertise encompasses new literatures, critical theory, folklore and culture studies, Hindu studies, Indian knowledge system, comparative literature, American literature, and many more. So, without any delay, I would like to request Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, for the inaugural speech. Ma'am, please.
Good afternoon. I feel extremely privileged to be hosting two eminent voices of the country today in the Hindi University Special Lecture Series. Professor Malashri Lal and Professor Kannan Periasamy, if I'm pronouncing the name properly. Uh, I have been long associated with Professor Malashri Lal. I think I know her since more than 2 decades. Uh, Even before I came to Delhi, IGNOU as a teacher, we had heard her voice, her literature, her critical research papers, her books, and everything when we were students in Odisha. I used to hear about her. And when I came to Delhi, I was privileged to meet her in multiple meetings in IGNOU and in Delhi University and at several places where she was a speaker, making her voice, making her research available to scholars and youngsters like us. And then as we grew up, she became one of my mentors, forever guiding and helping me for the design and development of courses in the university. Apart from that, reading my creative writing, giving me very important and valuable comments on my creative writing on my books. And then eventually, in due course of time, I read almost all her books, though I will not claim that. I read many of her books and I reviewed her. And today, Professor Malashri Lal is one of the closest persons that I have in my academic circle. Apart from that, personally, I'm very, very well connected to Madam Insert, and I'm a part of her family circle as well. This is my personal, association with Professor Malashri Lal. And coming to the research and the lecture that she is going to deliver today, I have been talking to her about it. Today, she will talk about the oral literatures from Bengal and then Rajasthan and from Himachal Pradesh. And probably she is going to make some points on oral literatures from these three regions and then make them a part of comparative world literatures that the series focuses on. The oral literatures from Bengal, like bold singers, and then in the Mangal Kavyas, and then from Rajasthan, like Babuji Ke Phad and oral epics like Tejaji, and then Himachal Pradesh, the local ballads and the ritual storytelling functions, how these things are embodied epistemologies and challenges in the print centric and Eurocentric and elite driven paradigms of comparative world literatures. Probably she's going to give a hint of that and then take her own point, her research to the preservation of these non-Western modes of knowledge systems and knowledge transmissions through the performative, ritualistic, and storytelling methods of oral studies today. And I'm looking forward to listening to her and taking points from her, because let me inform Professor Kannan and Professor Malashri Lal that we are, contemplating on introduction of new departments on comparative world literatures, and that is when we will also have courses on oral studies, oral literatures, and folk literatures, and all of that. And Professor Malashri Lal's research and lecture that she is going to deliver today is going to be one of our background studies for the design and development of those courses. Professor Malasilal already knows that I have been a part of, I have designed the MA Folk Literature in IGNO, where I have given a lot of importance to oral literatures. That is when I used to have discussions with her. And her lecture is definitely going to enrich me and my faculty and students today. Thank you so much, Professor Malasilal, for having accepted our invitation at the Hindi University. Now, coming to Professor Kannan Swami from Karnataka, I got introduced to him very, very recently, last month itself in West Bengal in a particular meeting. And he immediately caught my attention with the commitment and the seriousness with which he was working in the meeting. In fact, no one recommended Professor Kannan to me. I met him eventually in a particular meeting, and then I saw that he was the most active member of all, and then he was seamlessly doing the research and the work, and his academic contribution in that particular meeting was substantial. That is when I decided that I am going to carry further with this person. And then in due course of time, in those 4 or 5 days, he became one of my very, very favorite people in the meeting. Everybody could notice that, and I was also very vocal about that. And then therefore, yesterday I requested him to deliver this lecture for Hindi University, and he was too kind to take care to prepare for this lecture. And then today I am sure that he is going to enrich me and my faculty and students. And from his lecture today, what we expect is, rewriting the canons of comparative world literatures by talking about the colonial encounters and the politics of re-signification in the comparative world literatures. He would be talking about Shakespeare's Tempest, and then another text related to a Tempest by Amicis. He is going to talk about these two texts. That's what he told me. Both the texts are the Tempest and A Tempest, I believe. The Tempest and A Tempest, I believe. And he is going to compare these two, and then he maybe expose the colonial ideologies embedded in the Shakespearean original text, and then the portrayal of Prospero in the benevolent civilizer of the world, and then take the idea further to the language power and the crisis of humanism in both the texts. And at the end of his lectures, we will be in a better position to discuss what all points he has taken out today. But anyway, Shakespeare is not a new name in any university in the country and in the world. So when he is taking out a canonical text like that of the Shakespeare's, it is a challenge to create new debates and new perspectives. And I'm sure that Professor Kannan, with his expertise, going to make a point for us and give us some interesting and important research. I welcome both of you to the Hindi University Special Lecture Series on Comparative World Literatures. Both of you are speakers. I think your numbers are 36 and 37, if I am correct. Paramita will check me. So many people have already spoken, many eminent scholars of the country and outside. They have already spoken in our particular or special lecture series. And this special lecture series is gaining momentum. Many universities are already approaching us that they want to make our lecture series a part of their classroom teaching, and we are considering those. So when you are delivering these two important lectures for us, which will be a part of our YouTube today, they are going to be helpful not only to West Bengal, to Hindi University and other universities in West Bengal, but also we will have wide network. These two lectures will be used by many scholars of the country and otherwise. So once again, wish you all the best and good luck, and thank you for accepting our invitation. I'm eagerly looking forward to listening to both of you. And now, Paramita, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, I would say I am really delighted to introduce Professor P. Kannan sir. who is a distinguished academician with an impressive educational background. He holds an MA and PhD in English from Karnataka University, Dharwad, as well as MPhil from Madras Christian College. Additionally, PGDTE from CIEFL Hyderabad, PGDCE and PGDAS from Karnataka State Open University, Mysore. He has 33 years of teaching experience. Professor Kannan sir has held various esteemed positions including NSS officer, NCC officer, director of Dr. Ambedkar Studies, chairman of Board of Studies and Board of Examiners, membership in the Syndicate and Academic Council, and also Registrar Administration and Registrar Evaluation. He has guided 20 PhD scholars successfully, and he has published about 25 articles in the national and international journals. Along with this, he has participated in 65 national and international seminars. At present, he is a senior professor and chairman of Department of English at Karnataka State Akka Mahadevi Women University, Bijapur, Karnataka. So now I would like to request Professor P. Kannan sir for his very knowledgeable lecture. Sir, please.
Om Mani Padmaya, the patron of the webinar on comparative world literature, Professor Nandini Sahu, Honorable Vice Chancellor, a fellow speaker, Professor and trainer, and the one who introduced me as nicely as possible. It's my privilege to associate myself with Professor Nandini Sahu, who
Professor Kannan, there is some issue with your internet probably.
is
Please hold on.
organizing
There is some.
this webinar on world literature.
We can't hear you, sir.
Audible now?
Paramita, please call him. There is some problem with his internet.
Sir, there is a problem with just a minute, sir. Sir, actually
But
your
in
voice.
our,
Yes. Sir, I think
is it all right now?
yes,
Yes.
Yes, sir.
yes. Excuse me, sir, it's stuck again.
Again. In my next half an hour discussion, what about now?
So now it's fine, but sometimes it's getting stuck.
It rains here.
Okay. Okay, sir.
There is
Now it's
weather
fine, sir.
disturbance. Is it all right now?
Yes, sir.
In my discussion, I would make an attempt to describe and the areas in which comparative study can be undertaken. Then I will make a comparative study of William Shakespeare's The Tempest and M.A. Caesar's A Tempest. Let me begin my talk with the description of comparative literature given in the Oxford Companion to English Literature by Dina Birch. Comparative literature is an academic discipline in which literary works and traditions of more than one nation or language are studied, thus permitting fuller understanding of international literary or linguistically defined disciplines such as English literature. Comparative literature ranges freely across frontiers in search of cross-cultural influences and correspondences. The name does not imply any obligation to compare different national traditions. The discipline has been more favored by American and European universities than by the British. This description generally explains the nature of comparative literature, in which literature of two or more nations, literature of two or more international languages is studied to understand the relationship with regard to similarities and dissimilarities, which will give a kind of world view. It is in fact Samuel Coleridge who for the first time used the phrase comparative study in his collection of aphorisms entitled Aids to Samuel Coleridge. He says that the act of comparing supposes in the comparing faculty certain inherent forms, that is, modes of reflecting not referable to the objects reflected on, but predetermined by the constitution and the mechanisms of the understanding itself. And under some one or the other of these forms, resemblances and differences must be subsumed in order to be conceivable, and fortiori, therefore, in order to be comparable. This is, in fact, Samuel Coleridge, who for the first time created the notion of comparative literature so that it will study the resemblances and differences, which are a very strong reason for any comparative approach. As far as the term world literature is concerned, it was the German poet John Wolfgang Goethe who introduced this term world literature in his conversation with his partner John Peter Eckermann in 1827. He has categorically mentioned, I quote and unquote, national literature is now rather an unmeaning, and the epoch of world literature is at hand, and everyone must strive to hasten its approach. This very clearly states that national literature is on the verge of losing its significance as the world is now prepared for literature which is going to connect different nations. This is what he has said in his conversation with his friend. Now, according to me, there are three sources which are responsible for the emergence of world literature. The first source is something that when literature is written in an international language and spread across the world, it becomes world literature. The second source is that when literature is translated from one foreign language into a native language and vice versa, it becomes world literature. The third and the most important factor for the emergence of world literature is comparative study. This is how world literature was able to emerge. We are able to understand that English literature from the beginning, from the pre-Elizabethan age till today, is somehow either borrowed, influenced, rewritten, re-narrated from Italian, Greek, Latin, and other literature. In order to understand the perspective of these works of literature, comparative approach is very, very essential. It is a comparative approach which is very pivotal and vital in making a piece of literature a world literature. It is also said that if there is an implicit moral injection inherent comparative literature, read more widely, learn more languages. These are the basic requirements for making any literature world literature, that there should be more wide reading and more languages. There are some fields in which comparative literature can be carried out. They are topics versus methods, periods versus regions, close versus distant reading, canons versus counter canons, genres and styles, writers versus readers. In all these fields, comparative study can be potentially and meaningfully undertaken. Now, I would like to take William Shakespeare's The Tempest and Emma Caesar's A Tempest for a comparative study as a sort of demonstration in my lecture. The Tempest by William Shakespeare was published in the year 1611, whereas A Tempest by M.A. Caesar was published in the year 1985 after 360 174 years. The Tempest is written in English language originally. A Tempest was written in French language, which was later translated into English by Richard Miller. And we can make a comparative study of these two works to understand the world view given by these two works. The world view given in the Tempest is that the whites are reformers, civilized, cultured, and the blacks are uncultured savages. It is the whites who were responsible for civilization, development of the lands and the cultures which were inhibited by the blacks. The world view of A Tempest is something which defies the world view of B Tempest. A Tempest very logically argues that the whites had nothing to do with the civilization and reformation of the blacks. Whatever was done in the name of development and civilization in terms of religion, language, culture was done for the progress, for the benefit, for the welfare of the white people, not for the black race at all. In other words, what A Tempest argues is that they do not want anybody to enslave them. They want to be free, independent, and masters of themselves. In order to understand this difference in the perspectives of William Shakespeare's The Tempest and M.A. Caesar's A Tempest, we have to compare the aspects of these two works very systematically. The first factor which one should consider for a comparative study is that the titles are very significant to understand the perspectives. The Tempest refers to the actual tempest which was responsible for the shipwreck of Prospero and his accidental landing on the island of the then Cycrox and the present Caliban. Whereas A Tempest refers to the psychological anxiety, tremor, uneasiness, which is experienced by Caliban in the presence of Prospero in his island. Caliban, who is the rightful heir of the island, is enslaved by Prospero. He is made to serve him and attend to all menial work without any sense of dignity and freedom. Prospero claims that he has educated him, but Caliban's education from Prospero is no use for him at all. Therefore, the tempest refers to the factual storm that was responsible for the shipwreckage and the landing of Prospero with his a very small daughter Miranda on this very strange island. Whereas in a tempest, this tempest refers to the sort of storm, cyclonic effect, disturbance, which Caliban undergoes in his own mother island. So this is how the comparison of the titles of these two plays brings us the kind of hidden knowledge that one is a general meaning, the other is a symbolic meaning. The next aspect which should be taken for the comparative study is the characters in both plays. In William Shakespeare's, there are Prospero, who is the former Duke of Milan, Antonio, his brother, who joined hands with the King of Naples to conspire the usurpation of Prospero from his dukehood in Milan. Alonso, King of Naples, Miranda, Prospero's daughter, Sebastian, King's brother, Ferdinand, King's son, Gonzalo, a counselor who was very useful for Prospero to escape from Milan, and other minor characters. In A Tempest, all these characters are retained, and at the same time, the author has included one additional new character called Issue, who is Black Devil God. This change in the characterization plays a very vital role in understanding the difference in the perspectives of the Tempest and A Tempest. It's a colonial narrative that blacks do not have a very proper religion. They do not have a God. They do not have a sort of culture that these whites have. In order to counter this argument, challenge this colonial narrative, M.A. Caesar has purposely included a character in his play, Issue, who is Black Devil God. Through this, the author argues that they have their indigenous God. They have their own indigenous way of worshipping, because the whites have always argued that the God of whites is the best God of all. The God of whites is the only real God, and the gods of all others are not gods at all. In order to dismantle this narrative, Caesar has introduced this character, Issue, who appears in the play, and this God wants, not like the whites want to eat. The whites may eat the meat of goat and sheep and chicken, but he argues that he wants black dog. This black dog is also very metaphorical, symbolic, and connotative in this play. This does not make a reference only to the meat of a black dog, but it refers to the most famous brand of liquor called Black Dog, because it is on the occasion of the liquor consumption. Issue makes a reference to this. So this is how comparison of the characters in The Tempest and in A Tempest reveals that A Tempest is a representative work of colonial ideology, which is upholding the supremacy, the high standard, or the white hegemony, whereas A Tempest upholds that their primary duty is to decolonize, not only politically, but also psychologically, which will ensure the true freedom for the blacks. When the conversations and dialogues are very carefully studied in The Tempest and A Tempest, we are able to observe very clearly that Caliban and Ariel are very submissive. They are very obedient, and they are also subservient to Prospero. Although Caliban thinks sometimes that there is no need for him to be obedient to Prospero, he always obeys to the orders of Prospero in the play. But in A Tempest, both of them, Ariel and Caliban, because Ariel is portrayed in A Tempest as a mulatto black. In other words, he is the advanced generation of pure blacks. However, he is a black only. And Caliban is a black. Both of them indulge in rebellious talk and action against Prospero. Whenever Prospero talks to Ariel about his freedom, Ariel does not surrender himself and begs for freedom. On the other hand, Ariel demands his freedom as a matter of his right. When Prospero reminds him of his enslavement by Cyclops in a bottle and was hung on a tree, Ariel very clearly states to Prospero that that condition would have been better than the present condition of being a slave servant to the white master. He argues that by being attached to a tree in a bottle, in the course of time, he would become a tree himself, or he would become part and parcel of a tree, which is an object of nature. Rather than to undergo humiliation, insult, embarrassment at the hands of Prospero, who treats him like an animal. Caliban also does not submit himself to Prospero as he does in William Shakespeare's The Tempest. Though he says in The Tempest, "You taught me language, my profit upon is that I could curse you." But Caliban does not curse Prospero, and his curse does not make any effect on Prospero at all. Because all of us know that the ship carrying the king of Naples, his brother, the prince of Naples, and others, is made to meet with a wreckage with the power of Prospero's magic. They are drawn to the island. Ferdinand is drawn towards Miranda through magic, and this magic makes them fall in love with each other. And in the course of time, their love is approved. All of them together are returning to Naples for the celebration of the marriage of Ferdinand and Miranda. They are going back at the end to their own state. This shows very clearly that the colonialists strongly believe that their curse is effective, that their curse will make impact on their enemies, whereas the curse of blacks will have no power to affect the whites at all. The whites are above any sort of impact from the black people. So this is how we are able to understand that the characters in the Tempest are created in such a way that they are obedient, subservient, and they have accepted slavery. Whereas in a Tempest, they revolt, they rebel against the master, because the Tempest was written by Shakespeare, who is a white. Although Shakespeare may not have meant to reinforce colonial narrative in his drama, because in Elizabethan age, the popular taste of the age, the popular spirit of the age was considered by William Shakespeare while he was drafting his plays. One of the very important factors of a popular taste of Elizabethan age was the inclusion of magic, witchcraft, and the inclusion of spirits in the play. He may not have meant to create a colonial ideology, colonial narrative, but that is what the Tempest did afterwards. The Tempest was considered to be a very powerful text of a colonial narrative, colonial ideology. And that became model text in the future days after 16th century. This was read by M.A. Caesar. M.A. Caesar is a Martinic champion of blacks. It is he who coined the word negritude. It is he who wanted the blacks to have a black consciousness and a pan-African movement to fight against the exploitation, suppression, and hegemony of whites over the blacks. He could have written a play, a different play with a different title to incorporate decolonization, post-colonial temperament, but he deliberately chose Tempest with indefinite article a Tempest, so that this is a counter to William Shakespeare's The Tempest. This is something in which the author is challenging, rejecting, decolonizing the ideology of whites, the supremacy of whites. Therefore, a comparative study of these two plays will clearly reveal that while The Tempest stands for colonial ideology, recommends, upholds colonial supremacy, colonialist whites as masters, and this binary master-slave binary, A Tempest does not accept this binary. It is not master-slave, it is master and another master kind of a binary. Caesar is not ready to accept a master-slave binary here. He is now inviting people of not only Africa and other countries to see how blacks were unnecessarily exploited by the white people. It is almost the international sensitization of the whites' behavior, whites' domination of blacks in the past. There is another very important fact which is revealed through this comparison. That is, when we compare the climax of The Tempest and A Tempest, in The Tempest, because climax is very, very important to understand the world view, the perspective of author or the text or the message. In The Tempest, Prospero leaves this island and goes back to his own country. Caliban is now left behind in this island. He is all alone. But Prospero goes back. This is something which is a political decolonization. This is a symbol or connotation of the independence, political freedom of the erstwhile colonies, including India. Whereas in A Tempest, all others are returning to Naples, but Prospero stays back. Prospero stays back in the island, and his staying back is very significant to understand the continuation of colonialism in one form or the other. Political colonization must have come to an end in all colonies, but psychological, cultural colonization is still continued. It still lingers in the colonies, in the form of language, in the form of their education, in the form of their belief, in the form of their tradition. The so-called indigenous people, ethnic people, are not able to recreate, are not able to bring back their old culture, old tradition. They are striving, but we are able to understand that most of the people in the colonies are under the irresistible influence and impression of a colonial value system, colonial lifestyle. This is indicated in the climax of A Tempest, where Prospero stays back. Prospero is not Prospero here. Prospero is the ideology, the value system, the colonial narrative for which Prospero stands. That ideology has stayed back in the colonies. This is how the study, comparative study of the end of these two plays reveals. So this is how we are able to understand that comparative study, comparative analysis is very, very important in the literature studies. Because without comparative study, the kind of knowledge that we derive, the kind of result that we derive will be always homogeneous, will be one-sided. The other side will be unrevealed. Comparative study will be able to provide us multiple layers of perspectives, multiple layers of inner meanings. Therefore, comparative literature is very, very essential. It's very, very significant. And comparative literature is something which is also very responsible for the emergence and the continuation of so-called world literature. Because whenever there is a comparative study, the literature of two countries, literature of two cultures, literature of two languages is undertaken for comparative study. Here, one is English, the other is French. One is colonial, the other is post-colonial. Without comparing these two texts, we will not be able to understand the colonial evil systems. If we studied only A Tempest, we will understand only the decolonial procedure recommended by M.A. Caesar. We will not be able to understand how there was a colonial oppression, how there was a colonial domination by the white people over the black people. Comparative study will reveal this very important difference. With this, I would like to conclude my deliberation on my topic, and I am open for further discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for such an informative lecture. Now, I would request Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am for her very significant remarks.
I was listening to Professor Kannan very carefully. Yeah, all the points I've taken down a few of them. Of course, it's difficult. It's a big challenge to sum up all those things that he talked about. Still, I have taken few points that will be useful for us for our syllabus design and research. Professor Kannan, he's a feminist. That's how I started my conversation, my discussion with him. And but then coming to these two texts, this when he talked about the canonical and the non-canonical literatures vis-a-vis comparative world literature, and then translation, importance of translation in world literature, and then a very pertinent advice you have given my students that read more widely, learn more languages. Yes, we have to learn more languages in order to, take comparative literature into our research and pedagogy. And then also you mentioned the canons and the counter canons in world literature. The two texts that you have taken, one from 1611 and one from 1985. So you have, maintained the spirit of comparative world literature. Uh, Two very different texts from very different regions and schools of thought. That is how the characters have, in your presentation, the characters have evolved, and then the storylines have evolved, keeping in view the timelines of both the texts. The first one was about white hegemony that you talked about, the Tempest, and then the second one, A Tempest, was freedom for the blacks and the indigenous people, breaking the binaries of the master slave scenario. But the food for thought for a country like India is, are we doing homogeneous research or it is heterogeneous? That's what I understood from your lecture. And then the psychological and cultural colonization of the British colonies, including India. Even after the political freedom, are we still parts of the psychological and cultural colonization? That is food for thought, and we have to think more about it. So, from your lecture, what I would like to conclude is you talked a lot about how, by rewriting the Tempest from the perspective of Calvin and Ariel, M.A. Caesar, he exposes the colonial ideologies embedded in Shakespeare's original text, especially in the portrayal of Prospero as a benevolent civilizer. And then how he resignifies Calvin from a savage into a symbol of black resistance, reclaiming the character's agency and linguistic power. That is one thing you were told. And then how he transforms the text into an anti-colonial manifesto, while Prospero becomes an embodiment of European imperialism, while Caliban and Ariel reflect divergent strategies of resistance, militant versus diplomatic. That was the critical point that I understood from your lecture. It was very, very fruitful, very interesting, engaging, and important. At the end of the lecture series, I mean, after Professor Malashri Lal has completed her, she completes her lecture. Probably we will be able to take a few questions from the participants. Now, I invite Professor Malashri Lal and hand it over to Paromita to formally introduce Madam and invite her.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, I must say I am really thrilled to introduce Professor Malashri ma'am, Malashri Lal ma'am, who is an eminent writer and academic with an impressive body of work spanning 24 books. After retiring as professor in the English department at the University of Delhi, she has continued to make significant contributions to literature and academia. Some of her notable publications include Tagore and the Famine and the Law of the Threshold Women Writers in Indian English. She has co-edited the Goddess Trilogy with Namita Gokhale and her play Betrayed by Hope, a play on the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt, received the prestigious Kalinga Fiction Award. Her poems on Mandalas of Time has recently been translated in Hindi as Mandal Dhwani. Her honors include the prestigious Maharani Gayatri Devi Award for Women's Excellence. Currently, she serves as the convener of the English Advisory Board of the Sahitya Academy. So now, I would like to request Professor Malashri Lal ma'am for a very insightful lecture where we will get a chance to see beautiful, colorful picture slides. Ma'am, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paramita, for that generous introduction. And let me express my gratitude to Vice Chancellor and Professor Nandini Sahu for inviting me to deliver a lecture in this prestigious series. And indeed, it is a series that everyone is talking about, and not only Hindi University, but I'm very sure that other universities will also gain by this innovative initiative that you have taken, Professor Sahu. So, my talk today is titled as Fleeting Words and Imagined Bodies, Oral Narratives and Women. Professor Sahu is entirely aware of my absolute commitment to feminism, but also looking at it on a far broader base than is done generally as a kind of a black and white statement. So, a department such as you have at the Hindi University gives me the opportunity to suggest different ways of comparison and what kind of feminism may be generated in the thinking about different regions of India and the folklore pertaining to women, and how this may be contrasted with folklore from other countries and also lead to a comparative literature study of women and where they stand in the literature of that country. So the my lecture will focus on India for now, but I will end with certain suggestions for broadening it into comparative study. So embedded in the literary history of India, as we know from Professor Sahu's writing and that of others, is a kind of eternal contrast between the scripted and the oral, the settled and the itinerant communities, and notions of development and backwardness. But we have to apply modern knowledge systems to break this kind of a dichotomy. And I'm interested in the meeting ground. I'm interested in the comparative studies because that is where the creative energy is most potent and where women are acknowledged as wisdom keepers. And they're acknowledged as wisdom keepers, even if the tale is told by men. Because I don't agree at all with the people who claim that feminism is a man versus woman situation. I believe men are as trapped within patriarchy as women are. So any thinking about oral narratives of women should keep in mind that the crossover between the literatures written by different people should be an open field. With that introduction, this particular lecture is going to flag a limited three areas. One, that the knowledge of environment is linked closely to the woman's reproductive cycle. Second, that the marriage motive dominates the folk imagination, and in this, the woman's body is the site. And third, the virtues of motherhood dominate the folk imagination, and motherhood is constantly upheld as the greatest of virtues and achievements of women. So I'm going to illustrate my arguments along these three lines and resort to some storytelling from different parts of our wonderful country and conclude with the suggested directions. But I want to acknowledge a particular statement made by Professor Sahu, which has caught my imagination and my academic writing recently. She says, knowledge sharing is knowledge production. And my attempt, therefore, is to present to you some of the knowledge sharing from rare oral repertoires so that we can glean comparisons. So these 3 points are to be illustrated by taking you on a journey to 3 different parts of India. The first one, very close to where you are in Calcutta, I'm going to take you to Birbhum, Rabindranath Tagore's favorite place, where he set up this incredible visionary university of Vishwabharati, the world university which has a motto which says the world in a nest. This is a nest which includes indigenous people, folklore, art, music, well-being, and it doesn't believe in a so-called mainstream. I conducted a field study there in twin villages, which maybe at some point your students can also visit. These villages are called Bollopukur Danga and Boner Pukur Danga. This study was done about 4 or 5 years ago. And then last November, I was drawn back to these areas and met up with some of the same people, talking a little about what I've found. The most prominent woman that I met during my research tour was somebody called Chompa. And she was absolutely the leader of the community. But it was her husband, Bolai, who was the official Sardar of the village. Now, this often happens that the work is done by the woman, but the credit is given to the politically appointed or socially placed man. Nevertheless, from Chompa, I learned many things. One, it's very important, as we say in feminism, for a woman to have financial freedom and independence and earning capacity. So Chompa was training the local girls in hospitality so that the village could be presented as an attractive place for homestay. And my experience, therefore, with Chompa was that we have to redefine education. Education is not just degrees. Education is life knowledge. Education is environmental sustainability and its knowledge. And therefore, we have to turn not to our mainstream books, but we have to turn to the oral lineage, which is largely with the women. So a closer look at the Santhal worldview to emphasize this point of physical environment and the emotional comfort that the practices bring. I will never forget that all over the village, it was eco-friendly material that was used for their huts. There was palm leaf on the roof. There was raw coconut, what we call dab, to drink. There were cotton fabrics that people wore and hibiscus flowers blooming all over the place. And I'll show you a slide in a little while. With great admiration, I noticed that all the damaged matkas in the house were not thrown away. They were lined along the rooftops so that they created a natural basin for birds to nest. And all over the village, you could see that there were birds, there was coconut, there was just absolute unity with the nature around them. From that, I moved to telling you of the origin myth that the Santhals believe in and that Champadi told me. The original creator is called Thakurjio, and he presided over the sky and the water. But there was no earth. So although he managed to create a lot of aquatic animals, there was turtle, fish, crab, all that kind of thing. There were 2 celestial birds that also got created, but they had no place to rest, to eat, to procreate. So some landmass had to be created. So Thakurjio then asked various of the aquatic animals to do something about it. They came up with a unique solution. The tortoise rested on the surface of the water, and the earthworm got on top of the back of the tortoise. The earthworm dug his mouth into the soil that was under the water, pulled it out and kept piling it on the back of the tortoise. And that is how the first land mass was built according to the Santhal way of life. And in this situation, the first human pair were created, male and female, from whom all the Santhals in this area claim their descent. And the story that Champa said, and I want to quote her, she said the first couple is called Pilchu Haram and Pilchu Buri. And their first habitat is called Hihiri Pipiri. And then she said with great pride, but don't ask me about geographical location or historical date. It doesn't matter. We believe in the timelessness of our existence. It was such a earth-shattering, mind-shattering, knowledge-shattering realization that this very beautiful, sustainable environment had this as its origin stories. Of course, they're an agricultural community, as we get in many places in our country. And every year, there is a particular ritual practice which is called Rote Bapla, and it means the marriage of the frogs. And this is conducted so that there is adequate rain. And there are beautiful songs about calling upon the paddy field. The paddy field is weeping. The paddy field is asking, when will be my wedding? When the water of the sky drenches the earth, then will be your wedding. So there is a constant reminder. And I'm fascinated by the simultaneous appearance of the pre-modern idiom that I have just described to you and the postmodern context in which we today are likely to look at oral narratives. However, it's not necessarily an idyllic place. And when I interviewed the younger people, some of them wanted to go away from this village. They said, what is our future? And we want to be like the TV stars. And since you understand Bengali, many of you, one of them said, I want to make a living. I want to be creative. Jamon TV te hoy, as it happens on television. Now, this is the worry that the environment will only be sustainable so long as we respect this oral tradition. And the oral tradition will only be respected when it comes into academia. So I congratulate you for doing this through your comparative literature studies and other resources. May I please now ask Aman to show us only 4 slides. 2 of them will illustrate what I've just said. The other 2 I request you to hold in your mind because I'm not going to interrupt the rest of the lecture with any more slides. So that is Champa and her husband Bulai. And you can take one look and know who the dominant person is. Next one, please. So those are the broken matkas on the rooftops. Aren't they beautiful? They're almost like art. Third, next slide. This is what I'm going to next talk about. This is a Phad painting from Rajasthan. And what I want you to notice is the central figure is that of Pabuji, who's a folk hero. And the rest of the painting is in actually small segments of storytelling. So it's a scroll, but it's not a continuous scroll. And the closest modern equivalent is a graphic novel. But I'll come to that in a little while in some more detail. And the next slide, please. So this is Chamba, which will be the third of my points and the third of my territories. And this is the bells at the temple of Sui Mata, about whom you'll hear more. And as in many temples, in this particular one, it's women who come and tie the threads and the dupattas and the chunnis in order to fulfill their vision of the future. So now let me go back to my lecture. I'm coming now, therefore, to my second point, which is that the marriage motive dominates oral narratives. And the women who command the plot, either as objects of desire or as agencies of destruction. Again, we're getting binaries, which we ought to question and also dismantle. So when we move to the deserts of Rajasthan, we come upon the scroll that you just saw a representation of, Papuji Ka Phar. And this divided rectangular pieces on that canvas are little parts of the story of Papuji. The interesting thing about the oral tradition in Rajasthan here, this is near Jodhpur, is that when the story is told, the singer, the traditional singer is called a bhopa and is usually male. He or his wife will hold up a diya, a little lamp, to any particular square in that story. And therefore, the narrative sequence will differ with each storyteller. So no two storytelling of Papuji's will ever be the same. Now that's fine. But what happens is, how do you then fix a text? The local answer is, why should you fix a text? Let's hear different stories differently told. The dynamism of oral literature is what we are there to celebrate. But the fascinating part which I want to bring to you here is that there is an oblique but a fascinating connection with the meta narrative of the Ramayana. And this is not my research, but this is something that comes out of a conversation that Komal Kothari, whom of course many of you know about, he's the doyen of folk lore and folk narratives in Rajasthan, and Rustam Barucha. What happens is, we need to go to the meta narrative of the part about Shurpanakha. When Shurpanakha is offering herself to the brothers, she decides, and of course both the brothers reject her. She goes circling them, particularly Lakshman. And in her own mind, it's like a Shadi Ka Phera, like the mandap. So she does 3 rounds. And by then, other things have happened, and she is, of course, sent away. What happens in Papuji Ka Phar is that Pabuji wants to get married, but he is what's called locally a chaste deity. So his family has to agree that he gets married. Now, he, of course, has to go away from his village along with most of the elder members of the village, and the village is going to be left unprotected for some time. Now, there's one wicked woman in his village who does not want Papuji to get married. She's also a shapeshifter. So she extracts a promise from Papuji that if anything should happen to the cows in his village, he will give up whatever he's doing and come and rescue the cows. And Papuji gives that word of honor when he goes to his wedding. Now, this wicked woman, who is a shapeshifter, as I said, comes in the form of a bird. And when 4 of the 7 rounds of the fire are completed, this is the marriage happening of Papuji and Phulwanti. This little bird comes to the ear of Papuji and says, listen, listen, the people have attacked your village and the cows are being taken away. And you promised that you will go and rescue them. So get up, get up. And Papuji, of course, he's a Rajput. Therefore, honor and the word given cannot be broken. There's a dramatic performance when this scene happens, that Papuji gets up. He's half married, 4 pheras done. Gets up, pulls out his sword, and he cuts the dupatta that holds him and his bride together as they're going around the fire. He chops that, and he goes rushing back to his village to rescue the cows. What follows then is the tragic end of the story in a way, because Papuji goes into heroic battle and he dies there. And in Rajasthan, the turban and the sword of the hero is sent to his wife. And as we know from many stories, Rani Padmini included, there is a sati or a johar that is expected. And that's exactly what Phulwanti does when she realizes that her husband is no longer living. She decides then to commit sati. Now, this raises a lot of interesting postmodern questions. The old values that were held so dear in the feudal Rajput setup, and I grew up in that part of the country, are they still valid, or do we, from our modern feminist and comparativist view, criticize such action taken by men and women? So the four pheras that Papuji, that sorry, let me go back to the Shurprakha story. She took 3 pheras. Papujis are the other 4 pheras. So in a way, though there is no direct link, except to suggest that the great honorable ideal that was held up by Ram is an example that people also think about in the villages. And it's an indirect allusion, but the meta narrative and the micro narrative do come together through episodes of this nature. The point, therefore, that I want to make is that there are many stories of male valor and female action, which may today read to us as stereotyping of women. As I said, women are objects of desire. They're supposed to be beautiful. They're supposed to be fought over. But from a contemporary feminist viewpoint, let us review this folklore from the folk point of view, from the values of the folk community. Let us not impose our modernist, postmodernist, global notions of feminism on to narratives of this nature and says, why? Why did she commit suicide? There may not be an answer, but what is significant, I think, in feminism is not the answers, but the questions. So that was the story of Papuji and my little commentary on where feminism and post-colonial understanding should go back to when studying such examples. I'll come to my third and last travel point. And here I'm going to take you to Himachal Pradesh and to Chamba. And the point I want to make here is the deification of motherhood through the story of Queen Sunaina Devi, or as she's commonly called, Sui Mata. This is Chamba and also a village called Bharmor, which is even today not approachable by road. But history and legend meet in the story of Sunaina Devi and her husband, Raja Sahil Varman, and the story goes back to the 10th century. It is said that the family, the royal family, wanted to move the capital city from this remote Bharmor, which had very poor weather conditions and accessibility issues. They wanted to create a new capital in Chamba. So a beautiful city was built. But when the people moved to Chamba, there was no water. There was a channel that had been created, but no water would flow into it. You cannot have a habitat without water. So the king gets a dream, and the divinity tells him that I need royal blood as sacrifice. He shares that with his wife, and it is pretty much indicated by the divine demand that the son would need to be sacrificed. But the wife says, look, if our son is sacrificed, that is the end of the Chamba lineage. But if I die, then the lineage will continue. Just please give me permission to commit a live burial. And though she's much loved, and the husband, is also extremely fond of her, he does give the permission. And the story is that Queen Sunaina and her handmaidens go down into that channel area, and there is a celebrity celebratory live burial, singing the praises of their ancestors, because this ancestral lineage is very much a part of the traditions in India. What does this happen then? As the water comes up, and that's why I called it bodies, women's bodies, as the water comes up to the neck level, Queen Sunana says, please remember to give my anklets to my daughter, and please bring my infant son to my breast for one last time. And as that happens, and she goes under the water, underneath the area that had been marked, water starts gushing into the new kingdom. In memory of such a sacrifice, the temple of which you saw the bells, it was created, and everyone that we met during our research is still singing the praises of Sunana Devi and her great sacrifice. So I ask you again, from a modern feminist point of view, does one venerate such sacrifice, or does one say, look, why did she? Is motherhood the only phase of a woman's physical existence that is to be venerated? Because it's actually a very small part, just 25 to 30 years of the reproductive age of women, that motherhood is a possibility. Before that, pre-puberty, the talk is about marrying the girl. Post the phase beyond reproduction, there is worry over widowhood. So everything seems to be linked to the woman's body as a reproductive receptacle. And the purpose of the reproduction is to carry forward the lineage. But today, when we are looking for comparative studies, as Sir suggested in the lecture that was so erudite, when we are looking at it today through the comparative angle, this martyrdom of motherhood, is this something that we are going to be able to critique, or are we going to stop at raising questions? So comparative studies, according to me, are invited to address such dichotomies and such cross-cultural factors. And in the broader sense of our cultural inheritance, the woman's sacrifice within the tradition of community well-being has always been praised. But is the nature of the praise to be redefined by modern feminists? And I would say, according to me, the answer is yes. So, in concluding the talk, I want to make a few suggestions for meaningful research in comparative literature deriving from the examples I have cited. I use the phrase fleeting words in my title to refer to the orality of literature and the protean forms that the orality takes. Nevertheless, we know that orality is transmitted along a matrix of time and space, and it undergoes many changes. The question, therefore, for modern feminism is, can we any longer postpone what is called freezing the oral? Because there is a lot of resistance in saying that if you freeze the oral, it's no longer oral. But my feeling is, if you don't freeze it at all at some point, it'll be lost. Because India has a large number of endangered languages, disappearing languages, and student teams are the best equipped to go into the community because they belong to those communities. If only student teams could be guided into speaking to their grandmothers, their mothers, their aunts, their uncles, the marriage brokers, the recipe keepers, the dyes, there is a fund of oral knowledge that can be not only gathered, but equally important, as was said in the previous lecture, is translation. They have to be translated so that they can become academic material. And unless there is academic material for studying oral literature, it will always have a secondary spot to the scripted and the colonial syllabus that Sir was talking about that we have inherited. The other thing that I want to mention is the unique storytelling tradition needs to be maintained. It's our unique stamp in India that we live within a mythology that is constantly and dynamically surrounding us. It's not a lost mythology. It is not a lost tradition. Let us keep it dynamic. Let us not allow it to disappear and get lost in time. And the second part of my lecture title was therefore imagined bodies. Why did I say imagined? Because so far, women have only been or primarily been seen as commodities in war and in peace, and also the bearers of male progeny. But women are also cultural torch bearers. Let us give that the priority. And as torch bearers, they have devised their own ways of transmission. But we have denied a lot of women from these communities, so called outlying, so called backward. I dislike those words. But they have been labeled as such and therefore not been educated in the formal sense. So we have to take the stories beyond the glorification of motherhood. We have to take the stories of women for their contribution to knowledge making. We must respect their wisdom, preserve it, honor it, translate it, transmit it through modern knowledge systems. And this is where the old and the new is not separated, but according to me, it is an infinite variety in which the continuity needs to be maintained. And the sooner we do this, the better it is. I'll give my last concluding 4 lines, not in my own words, but in the words of Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, because he was very respectful to the Santhal community where he lived and built his university. It's a few lines from his poem called Shautal May, which I translated as the Santhal girl. The Santhal girl walks the pebbled path. On her head is a basket of mud. With shame, I wonder at this woman who's laboring for my house with her body, her soul, her simple energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an enlightening and informative lecture. Now, I would request Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, for a very valuable remarks on this.
Thank you so much, Paramita. Commenting something on a lecture delivered by Professor Malashri Lal is definitely stepping into big shoes. Still, let me try to do it. Let me make an attempt. Uh, Such a fascinating title of your lecture, Malashri ma'am. Fleeting words and imagined bodies. Uh, Two different ideas, you have combined them, you have created a kind of collaboration by taking oral narratives into consideration. As a folklorist, I especially enjoyed your lecture. I could connect with you and your research at many points. You started about feminism. I think Professor Kannan will be very happy to comment on that. He is one of the best feminists I know. After I have commented, I would request him to give a few comments on that. And then, Malashri madam, you talked about folklore, the scripted and the oral, both. I belong to that school of thought which, that doesn't believe that anything that is documented doesn't remain folklore anymore. Rather, to me, it's time that, as you said, it's time that freezing the oral is necessary. Documenting the oral is necessary. I completely agree with you that we should not romanticize folklore. We should not keep folklore at a distance and then talk about it and never take that to our research and university tables. I completely agree with your school of thought. And then one thing you said is very, very pertinent here. Apply modern knowledge systems to folklore and then create a comparative literature scenario vis-a-vis folklore. Modern knowledge systems like use of ICT or use of digital humanities and post-truth kind of things to preserve folklore is very important. Document folklore, folk knowledge systems and dying knowledge systems is very, very important. And I'm glad that you accepted my idea of knowledge sharing as knowledge production. I'm glad that you mentioned it, and then I always believe in this. And then you also talked about very interesting and important things like women as wisdom keepers. I had been to a folk festival, the carnival, where in on International Women's Day in Russia, they celebrate women and their documentation. That is the only celebration of International Women's Day in Russia, and then they take interesting things from folklore like Latmar festival in Rajasthan. Even there, they create such a scenario where some women are abusive with some other women in some folk festivals to create an awareness among the audiences, mostly men, that how they make the women feel round the year on International Women's Day in a very subdued manner, in a very dramatic manner, they present it to them, like in Latmar in India. That on Holi, the women are allowed to use a lat and hit their husbands, that kind of a thing. And then also you pointed at marriage motive in folk imagination and female body as an agency, and then the virtues of motherhood as dominant folk imaginations. That was so interesting. I'm going to read a bit more about it. No wonder why I always call Malashri ma'am as the Malashri Lal, giving such interesting research and such innovative ideas. I was rather very much benefited by your lecture. Then anyway, you also mentioned Tagore's literature. I am a serious and a thorough Tagorean, so I definitely loved it. Then credit transfer to men for women's work. That is one thing. In MA folk literature that I have designed, one entire chapter is dedicated to this. How women are the preservers of livestock and folk rituals and everything, and how the credit is entirely transferred to men vis-a-vis money and academics both. Women are the preservers but men are paid for that. I will share that chapter with you later on. Then this thing, he re p read something, I will read more about it. It's so interesting. It took me to the ideas of the creation myth. And then Rote Babla, the frog marriages. Ma'am, I have attended a frog marriage in Madagascar. So you can create a comparative study here as well. So much to compare. Frog marriages. I had been to Madagascar for some other work to design some courses and something, and they invited me one evening to attend a frog marriage. And when you talked about it, I was so fascinated. And then Pabuji, yes, the hero of Rajasthan. In our MA folk literature, we have one chapter on Pabuji. I'll also send it to you. And yes, a graphic novel from Pabuji text. And then when you said no need to fix a text but to celebrate it got me into thinking, why do we even try to fix a text? We don't need to appropriate or fix any text. We should only celebrate. And then meta narratives of the Ramayana, yes. And postmodern questions from feminist and comparative views, yes. That is something that we all need to do. And Sui Mata in Himachal, Sunena Devi, Raja Sahil Burman, I will do some more research on that, and I will ask you more questions if I need to understand more about it. And then vis-a-vis the veneration of motherhood, even this is so modern. Even today, in any metropolitan city like Delhi or Calcutta or anywhere, immediately after marriage, a woman is given a role. You have to be a mother. So from folk and mythical studies, you have created these issues, problematized these, and you have brought them to the modern storytelling and to the modern system. It's the martyrdom of motherhood, and cross cultural factors are there. And yes, you are very right when you said that counter the colonial syllabi and create some syllabus that is truly the need of the hour. And I thoroughly enjoyed your lecture, ma'am. And we are going to get back to you to ask more questions. Now, may I request Professor Kannan to give a few comments before Paromita takes questions from others?
Thank you very much, Professor Sahu. I really enjoyed listening to your comments and I value what you have said.
Now, I would request Professor P. Kannan sir to share his valuable comments. Sir.
I listened to the deliberation of Professor Malashri Lal and was impressed because she has reminded all of us the field which is forgotten among the so-called modern and elite scholars. We who have been discussing post-modernism, post-colonialism, meta-narrative, metafiction, now have forgotten that the characteristics of all of them were there in folk literature also. Madam was rightly observing, and in fact I informed Professor Nandini also when she was in the camp. Folk literature, folklore is folk wisdom. In fact, the modern concept of universal is not universal. Whereas we are able to see the wisdom in folklore which is applicable across the countries, people, culture, languages. In fact, I was planning to collect the proverbs which also are embodiment of a wisdom, social wisdom, spiritual wisdom from Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, Malayalam, and try to understand how these languages are originated from a common source. Like this frog marriage is there in our tradition also. When somebody is not getting married for a very long time, it's a belief, although superstitious, that the girl would get married if frogs are wedded. And in many cases, it became true. Superstition is better than a wrong reason, a damaging reason. And there was also a kind of belief that in order to make the marriage lasting, they would cut a banana tree, and after that, marriage would be performed. And so many beliefs were there, along with very rational practice also. In our culture, widow remarriage was very common. When husband dies, the widow is married to her husband's brother as soon as the cremation is over. In other words, it was a matriarchy system which we had in our country originally. And Madam made a very interesting comment that feminism is not man versus woman. And somehow it is not man versus woman, it's man's domination over woman. Feminism took its birth from realizing this. There are another set of beliefs, folklores, folk tales, which were used by patriarchy to make the people believe that such notions are natural, especially the gender inequality is natural, as the feminist said, sex is biological, gender is social construct. There used to be songs in which a brother would sing to his sister as what and how she should perform her duties. And there is no song to remind a brother or a son as how he should perform his duty as husband after marriage. So many things are there. And in the long run, they were all internalized. As Franz Fanon says, internalization of inferiority, internalization of this so-called you said woman as a mother, martyrdom, woman as a holy being, woman as very virtuous being. All these things they started believing. Later on, it resulted in gender discrimination.
Right. Thank you. Yeah,
At the
Dr.
beginning,
Paramita is, sir,
we
Dr.
are
Paramita.
we are able to compare this with the African culture.
Sir, Dr.
We have a
Paramita is
home.
getting restless. We have another meeting at
1 minute,
2:30, so
madam.
maybe
There is a
we can
concept
conclude
called
it.
homestead culture in African society. Everything is equally distributed between man and woman in their homestead.
Okay.
But here, menial works are given to women, and the better works or glorified works are given to men. This should go, and we have to create new myths, new folklore to stabilize this discrimination between man and woman. Thank you very much.
So
Thank
wonderful. Very pertinent comments. Malashri ma'am, would you like to comment or we can conclude?
I want to thank the Honorable Professor for his very astute observations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot. Paramita, you can conclude.
Thank you, ma'am. And this is a request to all our viewers that if you have any questions, please feel free to send it to our mail address in the university's mail address, which we have shared. And now, at the end of our webinar, before we go, we would like to thank Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Nandini Sahu Madam, our distinguished speakers, Professor P. Kannan sir and Professor Malashri ma'am, and the team of Hindi University, and our lovely participants for joining us today. Thank you and have a very good day. Namaste.
Thanks a lot. Namaskar, Professor Kannan and Professor Malashri.